"23 hours after Pearl Harbor burned, while the smoke was still rising and America was still trying to understand what kind of war it had just entered, a single telegram left Washington and moved quietly across the Arizona desert. Standard War Department paper, black ink, no emotion. It requested the immediate presence of Apache tribal elders at a military installation known as Fort Wuka, for what it described as a matter of national security and cultural preservation. There was no mention of combat, no mention of death, no hint of what would be taken or what would never be given back. That night, 12 Apache elders crossed the Sonoran Desert under a cold, open sky. They did not know that when the door closed behind them, American history would split into two versions, the one that would be taught and the one that would be buried. The room had no windows. One bare bulb hung from the ceiling. Its light stretched shadows across concrete walls, long and distorted, as if something else had already arrived before anyone spoke. 3 Army officers sat across the table. No name tags, no rank insignia. Identity itself had been stripped away. The oldest officer placed a leather folder on the table but did not open it. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice steady but thin, "we are about to ask for your help in winning this war using methods that will never be acknowledged. Not by this government, not by any other." No one moved. "What we discussed tonight," he continued, "will be classified beyond even our nuclear program. If you agree, you will train men to become something the modern world no longer believes exists." He paused. "You will create ghosts." Joseph Tisose, chairman of the tribal council, studied the officer's face. He had lived long enough to recognize fear disguised as authority. His reply survived only as a single fragment, declassified decades later. "Our grandfathers knew how to make an enemy afraid of the dark," he said. "If you want us to teach your soldiers that art, you must understand the cost. Once a man learns to move like the wind and kill like the mountain lion, he does not easily return to being a man who sleeps peacefully." That was the moment the United States crossed a line it would spend the next 80 years pretending did not exist. What the military proposed had nothing to do with the Navajo code talkers, who would later be honored, named, remembered. This was different. This was about weaponizing ancient Apache guerrilla knowledge, psychological warfare refined over generations, then fusing it with modern training, modern science, and unlimited authority. The program never appeared under an official name. Researchers would later call it the Shadow War Initiative, not because the name was accurate, but because nothing else fit. By January 1942, a training facility was carved into a narrow box canyon 30 miles northeast of Fort Wuka, on land once used for Apache hunting. The location was chosen deliberately. The Army wanted the trainees surrounded by something older than doctrine, older than uniforms, something that could not be taught on a parade ground. 147 men reported for training. 63 completed it. The rest vanished from all military records. Their families received telegrams stating they had been transferred to classified assignments. No details, no follow-up, no bodies. For 6 months, what happened in that canyon existed only in fragments and whispers. The men learned to move without disturbing leaves, to navigate by stars and scent, to survive weeks behind enemy lines with no supplies. But the most important lessons were psychological. A journal entry from Lieutenant Robert Chin, dated March 14, 1942, would later surface among his personal effects. Today, I watched something that made me question whether we are the good guys in this war. They call it the fear walk. You stalk an enemy position for hours, leaving signs you were there without ever revealing yourself. Objects move slightly. Sounds appear with no source. By the time contact happens, the enemy is already defeated. They are fighting ghosts, and ghosts cannot be killed. Chin asked one of the Apache instructors what happens to the men afterward. The instructor, barely 24 years old, answered without hesitation. "They won't all come back," he said, "and the ones who do will not be the same men who left." In June 1942, the 1st Apache Shadow Unit deployed to the Philippines. 12 men, Mindanao. Official mission, reconnaissance. The reality was something else entirely. A Japanese officer, Lieutenant Yamamoto Kenji, recorded an encounter in his diary on August 3, 1942. "We found Nakamura hanging from a tree at dawn. His throat was cut, but there was no blood on the ground. Around the tree were markings we could not identify. That night, the jungle made sounds that were neither animal nor human. By morning, 6 more men were dead. No footprints, no disturbance. The men believe we are being hunted by spirits." Yamamoto never learned that only 2 Apache operatives were responsible for the collapse of his unit. But American command did, and they took notes. Back in Arizona, the program expanded. Training intensified. Oversight disappeared. Soldiers stationed at Fort Wuka reported strange lights in the canyon at night. Men who moved wrong. Men who spoke too softly. Men who felt off. In November 1942, the base psychiatrist filed a report after examining 17 personnel who had encountered the trainees. "Persistent nightmares, paranoia, and inability to feel safe," he wrote. 3 requested transfer to frontline combat, stating they would rather face the enemy than remain near men who have stopped being men. The report was immediately classified, because by then the Army had already learned the lesson that mattered most. The shadow units worked, and once a weapon proves effective, history shows it rarely asks what it costs, only whether it can be used again. By the end of 1942, the Shadow War was no longer an experiment. It was a system. Apache units were deployed across theaters with no coordination with conventional command. They did not file standard after-action reports. They did not request reinforcements. They did not operate on maps that anyone else could see. Orders came through a parallel chain of command that officially did not exist, routed through offices that left no paper trail. Where they operated, battles ended without battles. In the Ardennes forest, during the winter of 1944, a German battalion reported being dismantled over 4 nights without sustained contact. Men vanished from guarded positions. Others were found days later in locations that made no tactical sense. A letter intercepted by Allied intelligence from Oberleutnant Hans Richter to his wife described the final days. "Every night, more men disappear. We find them later, if at all, always where we should have seen or heard something. Our officers say, 'Hold the line,' but there is no line anymore. There is only the forest and the things that move inside it." 3 days later, the battalion surrendered without firing a shot. It was the first recorded instance of a full Wehrmacht unit surrendering without engagement. American intelligence classified the report and removed it from circulation. In the Pacific, the pattern escalated. On Okinawa, Japanese defenders began referring to their attackers as the Silent Ones, forces that infiltrated fortified positions without triggering alarms, without visible approach, without sound. One recovered Japanese command report described a bunker found with every occupant dead, no wounds, no signs of struggle. Medical review concluded all personnel had suffered simultaneous, stress-induced cardiac failure. The same night, the same hour. An American Marine after-action report from May 1945 described advancing into a cave complex expected to hold heavy resistance. Instead, they found bodies, arranged, some positioned to appear alive, watching the entrance, others placed in locations no living man could have reached. The Marines withdrew. The report ended with a recommendation rarely seen in combat documentation. This site should be sealed and avoided. Whatever occurred here exceeded conventional warfare. By the spring of 1945, the numbers told a clear story. Over 200 documented operations, more than 3,000 confirmed enemy deaths, entire enemy formations broken without direct engagement. The Shadow War had shortened campaigns, saved resources, reduced American casualties. On paper, it was a success. But no one had planned for what happened when the war began to end. The men trained to become shadows did not know how to stop. Reports filtered back describing Apache operatives who failed to respond to commands, attacked friendly forces when startled, or simply disappeared into terrain and never returned. A classified medical report from the Philippines, dated July 19, 1945, described 3 operatives found wandering in a dissociative state. Subjects do not respond to conventional psychiatric intervention. Speech patterns do not match known dialects. Physical performance exceeds baseline expectations. REM sleep suggests extreme trauma, yet waking effect shows no distress. They appear to exist between operational and civilian cognitive states. The report recommended specialized care. The recommendation was denied because acknowledging the damage meant acknowledging the method. As demobilization began, the military faced a problem it could not solve with secrecy alone. These men could not be reintegrated. They had been trained to operate without rules, without identity, without restraint. They were effective precisely because normal human limits had been stripped away. So the solution was administrative. Of the 237 men who completed Shadow War training between 1942 and 1945, only 68 appeared in post-war military records. The rest vanished. Families were told their sons had died in combat. No bodies were returned, no graves marked, no names engraved. They became ghosts in peace, just as they had been in war. Those who officially survived were sent to a facility that appeared nowhere on maps, referenced only indirectly in post-war memos. Letters that escaped censorship told a different story. One, written in October 1946 by a man named Thomas Nike, read, "They say this place is for recovery, but it is a prison. They give us drugs to dull memory. They ask what we did and recoil when we answer. I think they are trying to erase us. But you cannot erase what you have become." Thomas Nike officially died of pneumonia 1 month later. No hospital records confirmed his admission. No body was returned. He was 26 years old. And then something else happened. The disappearances continued. Throughout the late 1940s and early 1950s, young Apache men, many too young to have served in World War II, began vanishing from reservations across the Southwest. They were approached by men in black sedans, offered opportunities, told their lineage made them special. Tribal police reports were filed, investigations quietly shut down. What no one outside classified circles understood was that the program had not ended. It had evolved. The Cold War demanded operatives who left no fingerprints, no insignia, no treaties violated. Between 1948 and 1963, a continuation program, codenamed Nightwind, recruited over 100 additional Apache operatives. They were deployed to Korea, Vietnam, Iran, Guatemala. Unlike their predecessors, these men never officially existed. In Korea, captured Chinese soldiers spoke of the wind that kills. In Vietnam, entire enemy units were found dead with no evidence of battle. A Green Beret officer later wrote of a clearing where over 100 Viet Cong lay dead, their faces frozen in terror. No shell casings, no craters, just fear. Carved into a tree nearby were symbols his local guide refused to approach. By the 1960s, technology had caught up to tradition. Declassified research revealed chemical agents capable of inducing paranoia, hallucinations, and fear through skin contact. Acoustic devices that triggered disorientation, panic, even cardiac arrest. When combined with Apache psychological techniques, the effect was devastating. Operations succeeded without gunfire, without witnesses, without accountability. And the men who carried them out paid the same price as those before them. They disappeared. They broke. Or they survived long enough to realize survival was not the same as return. By the time the Vietnam War ended, the Shadow War had become something else entirely. Not a program, a doctrine, one that proved a dangerous truth, that the most effective weapons do not destroy armies, they destroy certainty. Long after the wars that justified it had ended, the Shadow War kept moving. It left no monuments, no victory parades, no folded flags. What it left instead were patterns. In the 1950s, Apache reservations across the Southwest began carrying a quiet weight. Elders noticed it first. Men who returned from service slept outdoors, even in winter. Some spoke in fragments, others avoided mirrors. A few vanished into the desert and were never searched for, not because they weren't loved, but because everyone understood what searching might awaken. Ceremonies were held, songs were sung, balance was attempted, but the medicine men spoke carefully. "This is not a wound," one elder said years later. "It is a reordering." The Cold War had no patience for such distinctions. As nuclear weapons froze the world in place, intelligence agencies sought tools that could move without treaties noticing. The techniques pioneered in the Shadow War were refined, sanitized, rebranded. Fear became a deliverable. Silence became a capability. Ancestral knowledge became an asset. In 2017, a defense budget document was accidentally released before being pulled back within hours. Buried deep inside was a single-line item: Heritage Warrior Continuation. $12.3 million. No explanation, no location, no oversight. When asked, officials described it as a cultural preservation initiative. The phrasing was almost perfect, because by then, the original men were gone. Those who survived lived under assumed names in remote places, carrying bodies that had learned to move faster than their minds could slow down. Men in their 80s who still woke before dawn. Men who never sat with their backs to doors. Men whose war never ended because no one ever told them it was over. Researchers who attempted to piece the story together ran into walls that did not exist on paper. Journalists stopped asking questions. FOIA requests returned empty. Notes disappeared. One investigator wrote privately, "It's not that the records are missing, it's that they are still alive." In the reservation, stories persisted. Food left at old places, gone by morning, tracks that stopped without explanation, figures seen at dusk, watching, never approaching. The elders did not romanticize it. They spoke of responsibility. "You cannot ask a man to become something for you," one said, "and then decide you don't want to see it anymore." That was the lesson hidden in the Shadow War. Not that it was evil, not that it was heroic, but that it was effective. And effectiveness, when detached from accountability, always comes back changed. The Shadow War proved something every empire eventually learns and tries to forget. That fear works. That terror scales. That psychological destruction is cheaper than rebuilding trust. It also proved something harder. That once you teach human beings how to step outside themselves, how to operate without identity, without restraint, you cannot simply ask them to return. You can erase files. You can seal vaults. You can rename programs, but you cannot undo a transformation. The men who became ghosts were not failures of the system. They were its success, and that is why their names were never written down, because history prefers lessons that end cleanly, wars that conclude, weapons that can be retired. The Shadow War offered none of those comforts. It left behind a question with no classified answer. What does a nation owe the people it asks to become something unnatural in its defense? And more dangerously, what happens when the methods that win wars quietly begin to define peace? The files remain sealed. The programs officially do not exist. The ghosts are not acknowledged. But somewhere, the knowledge remains. Passed carefully, used selectively, never discussed publicly. Because once you learn how to break the dark, you also learn how easily the dark learns you. And some victories, no matter how complete, never let anyone go home.